All right. So let's keep this discussion going, and let's make the official transfer after not having any of it for the past 3 weeks. We'll get back to talking about the Boston Celtics here on Celtics Beat, I swear. Gery Woelfel, Racine Journal Times. Our interview with Gery is brought to you by Audible. Audible is a leading source of audiobooks online with over 180,000 downloadable titles to choose from nonfiction to fiction to periodicals. Audiobooks are great to listen to wherever you are and whenever you want. And for our Celtics Beat audience members, Audible is offering your first audiobook for free to give you a chance to try out, for my money, one of my favorite sources going. Log on to audiblepodcast.com/Celtics to grab your free audiobook. That's audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. Personally, cannot thank Audible enough for not just supporting this podcast, but for the service they do provide. That's audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. We also can't thank Gery enough for joining us. Gery, welcome on into Celtics Beat.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you.
Definitely going to talk about the big offseason, come up here as connected as any guy is in and around the NBA circles. But there were the NBA Finals. The NBA season is finally wrapped up. Got to get your sort of final thoughts on this. LeBron James, do you think he was worthy enough to win that MVP award, even though the Cavaliers ended up submitting in 6 games there?
Oh, absolutely. Let's face it. If they would have had KYRIE and Kevin Love, it might have been a different story. It would probably win 7 games, and who knows, maybe Cleveland would have won. LeBron, it was basically 1 on 5. I mean, they were playing hot potato with the ball. Nobody else wanted to really shoot. J.R. Smith was in another world, on another planet. And it was basically LeBron against everybody else. And how he managed to keep them in the series, just speaks volumes of the talent that he is.
That's sort of exactly my train of thought as well. And even his quote-unquote his worst game, Game 6 back on Tuesday night, I believe he was 13 of 33. This is what I've always argued amongst the greats, is even when they don't have, great shooting nights, be it Larry Bird, if you want to go back, use that example, he can still impact the game in other ways. Nicky came down with 18 rebounds, still facilitated plenty of offense. I agree with you 100%. If it's most valuable, he was the guy. If he wasn't there, that could have been just a debacle of biblical proportions. But last thing to sort of wrap this up NBA-wise, Golden State did pull it off, and there was a lot of talk about where this Warriors team ranked all time. I have them more in that second tier with the 0-1 Lakers, 83 Sixers, not quite up, with the Bird, Celtics, Magic, Lakers, Jordan Bulls, Russell, Celtics. Where do you think this team comes down in terms of the all-time great single-season teams in NBA history?
Well, maybe I'm in the minority here, but I don't even think they're remotely close to being one of the all-time great teams. We just got done saying they beat up a one-man team, and all of a sudden people are trying to anoint them as one of the great teams of all time, which I think is ludicrous. When Kareem Abdul-Jabbar won his championship in Milwaukee, he had guys like Bobby Dandridge and Oscar Robertson, and nobody ever talks about them as being one of the all-time greats. And I guarantee you, that Bucks team is better than this Warriors team, simply because of Kareem and Oscar. I mean, you have 2 certifiable Hall of Fame players, and Bobby Dandridge is maybe one of the most underrated players in the history of the game. And I talked to Wayne Embry, just recently, and Wayne is absolutely convinced that Bobby Dandridge should be in the Hall of Fame. Now, you can argue that he isn't, but the fact that Wayne Embry thinks that he is, tells you how good a player Bobby Dandridge was. So to put the Warriors as one of the top 15, top 20 teams of all time, I think that's a little premature.
Yeah, that's sort of the comparison I was actually using. I threw the 71 Bucks in there when I was discussing a little earlier in the show because they had that great season in 71. They were blowing teams out. And I think they got back there in 74. They lost to the Celtics, but that was sort of it. They never really got that second championship, and that's why we don't discuss the Bucks as one of the great single-season teams ever, because it seems that we're biased towards teams that do it over multiple years and do get those multiple championships. Obviously, the Celtics got that title in '86 with the 15-1 home record, but they had they were dominant throughout the '80s, same as the Lakers, and same as the Bulls in the '90s. But obviously, now I definitely want to shift. I have tremendous amount of respect for the work you do. You're one of the great NBA insiders going, and fans can check you out on journaltimes.com. NBA draft, less than a week away. It's sort of like Mang, right? I mean, the season just ends. Far cry from the NFL when it's a big break. Here we are. We're just a few days away from the NBA draft. Pretty biased question. This is Celtics beat, so I'm going to ask, which teams do you think are the most active in terms of trying to maneuver around and make something happen for them? Is it the Boston Celtics?
Oh, I don't think there's any doubt about that. I wrote about this maybe about a week or two ago that they were offering their 2 first-round picks, to move up in the top 10, and I think there's a chance. They might have to sweeten the pot a little bit and throw in a player or two, but I think there's a possibility that could happen, because what I've been hearing is that teams from 6 through 10, even 11, Indiana, are definitely open to moving their picks, and the problem is that if you talk to most general managers and scouting directors, they feel like this is an 8-man draft. And then after the 8th pick, it's like, beauty is in the eye of the beholder. And, take a guy like Sam Decker. I mean, I've heard Sam Decker possibly going to Miami, that Miami loves him at 10. I've also heard Sam Decker could be on the board when the Bucks pick, Kevon Looney, he could go anywhere. He could go real high. He could go into the 20s. So I think once you get beyond those 8 guys, it's pretty much, hey, who do you like the most?
Could you talk to me a little bit about Sam Decker? Because obviously he went to school pretty close to you guys, so I'm sure you're a little familiar with him, to say the least. Do you mind just giving me and even the audience a little bit of a scouting report on him, if that's all right?
Yeah, no problem at all. I think he's a tremendous talent. I really do. The only chink in his armor is maybe his consistency. He's been erratic, where he's played really well and then not so well, and part of that had to do with playing with Bo Ryan at Wisconsin. And Bo Ryan, I know a lot of people out on the East Coast are really that familiar with him, but he is an absolute perfectionist. If you have a turnover, you go to the bench, and it doesn't matter who you are. And there was a game I went to this year where Wisconsin, I think, played Indiana, and Decker turned the ball over like maybe 2-3 minutes into the game, and Bo Ryan pulled him. He sat him for like about 8 minutes. And that's the type of guy he is. And sometimes players can't play as freely as they want. Now, having said that, I saw Sam Decker play out in Las Vegas this past summer at the LeBron camp, and he was sensational. He played in a different system. It was more up and down. Had a chance to show his athleticism and his all-around game. And I talked to a veteran Western Conference scout, and he said that he believes that Sam Decker will be better than Chandler Parsons. Now, Chandler Parsons just got a max contract last summer, and this guy was sky high on him, thinks he's got a huge upside. And then, of course, he also played well at the Kevin Durant camp. So there's a segment of NBA people that love him, and there's a segment that is lukewarm on him. But I just can't imagine him getting any farther than Milwaukee, which picks right after Boston.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. My way of following the NBA draft is through some people I respect with the mock drafts, and obviously I see Sam Decker's name thrown around a lot with the Celtics, so I do have a lot of interest in him personally. Another name that sort of pops up is Willie Cauley-Stein. A lot of people just attach him to the Celtics largely because they say, oh, geez, the Celtics, they need a center. He seems to be that type of guy. Is that people connecting the dots, or you really think there's a lot of mustard there?
Well, I think there's a lot of teams that would like to have Cauley-Stein, including the Milwaukee Bucks. And from what I hear is that he'll probably go in the 6 to 8 range. And like I was saying earlier in the show, there's about 8 guys that most NBA people believe that are fully capable of being very good players in the league, and he's one of them. But I would imagine if the Celtics move up, they would definitely be in the hunt for him. But again, I've heard several teams that want to move up into that category as well.
And to sort of wrap up the draft talk in a way, I know it seems a little obvious, but Karl Anthony Towns, no question about it, number 1 overall to Minnesota, and then everything should sort of fall in place from there.
Well, Larry, you're talking probably the only guy on the face of the earth that doesn't think it's a slam dunk.
All right. Well, here we go. I'd love to hear what you're going to say.
And here's why. The other name that obviously everybody's talking about is Okafor. And Okafor, I don't know if you know this or not, is represented by Bill Duffy, okay? Bill Duffy and Flip Saunders were roommates in college, okay? Take it one step further. Andrew Wiggins is represented by
Let me guess,
Bill Duffy. Now, if you're the Minnesota Timberwolves and you got to deal with Andrew Wiggins, and if you're Flip Saunders, who has a great rapport with Bill Duffy, do you want to upset that cart? I don't know. I mean, again, everybody's saying it's Towns, but I don't think this story is over yet.
That's very interesting. You're right, because people can say and sort of just, say, oh, geez, well, maybe Okafor wouldn't be as great of a fit because Minnesota already has some centers. But you're right. When you have your friends just in your ear all the time, whether it be picking a player or, I don't know, even going to see a movie for that matter,
mm-hmm.
like,
exactly.
You got to see this. No, you got to. You're right. It has a lot of influence on them. So I'll definitely keep an eye on for that, because it seems like if Minnesota does pick Okafor, that throws a monkey wrench into the whole draft, because it seems like Los Angeles is banking on Okafor at the center position. And then, I mean, I don't know what the Knicks are going to do with their 4th overall pick. Is there anything to that? Do you think you could see them moving that around?
When push comes to shove, I think they're going to keep it. I mean, it's very seldom where a team that's picking at the top, in the top 5 or 6, trades that pick unless they get some, hellacious offer, And I just can't see anybody doing that, especially when, the top 3 are going to be off the board right away. So my gut feeling is at the end of the day, the New York Knicks are going to be picking right where they are.
All right, that's a pretty definitive answer. Got to take a quick break. Hang in there, Gery. Hang in there, audience. We'll be back with Gery Woelfel of the Journal Times on the other side of the break.
Hey, this is Nick Gelso, co-owner and founder of CLNS Radio. Today's podcast is brought to you by Lynda.com. Lynda.com is the home of expert video tutorials. Because you're such a loyal listener of CLNS Radio, and it's 2015, you want to kick the new year off in style, claim your free trial today from CLNS by going to lynda.com/CLNS. That's LYNDA.com/CLNS.
This is Larry H. Russell back here again, and let me tell you a little something about me. I'm always reading a book, or 3, be it a revolutionary breakthrough on neuroscience such as Daniel Kahneman's Thinking Fast and Slow, or even a philosophical masterpiece like Plato's The Republic. I'm always doing whatever means to soak up as much knowledge as I can about the world we live in. And we can't do that without literature. But not everyone finds it convenient to carry around all 6 volumes of the history of the decline and fall of the Roman Empire with them. But there's a solution. My good friends over at Audible. Audible is a leading provider of audiobooks with over 150,000 downloadable titles across all types of literature. You don't need to be all alone creating that impossible private time with our everyday lives of chaos to do some reading and relaxing. Audiobooks are great to listen to wherever, be it in the gym, doing chores at work or around the house, driving, riding, shopping, whatever. Audiobooks are the remedy for you. And Celtics Beat and Audible are teaming up to offer you your first audiobook for free. Just go to audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. That's audiblepodcast.com/Celtics. All right, everyone, welcome back into Celtics Beat. Gery Woelfel of the Racine Journal Times is with us, NBA insider. Gery, I lied. I got one more question I have to ask regarding the NBA draft. Earlier in the week, there were some reports regarding some veterans out there that could possibly be moved. Ty Lawson was one of the names. Who is someone who could be moved on draft day for draft choice, or even someone else for that matter?
That's a very good question. So far, it's been very quiet, but it wouldn't shock me to see some teams moving veteran players before then. But as of right now, it is incredibly quiet. I think, when the proverbial stuff hits the fan is going to be like 3 or 4 days before the draft. That's when everybody really, really gets serious about what they want to do. And right now, it's a high stakes poker game, and nobody's showing their cards because it's too early in the game. But like I said, within the next, probably 3 or 4 days, I think, things are going to heat up dramatically.
Yeah, that's just was really jumped out at me these past 3 weeks, and it's why I've used the show Celtics Beat to not discuss the Boston Celtics at all, because this has been one of the more quieter lead-ups to the draft, and even free agency for that matter, which is a couple weeks in a way in itself. Usually you're hearing all the rumors in the world around the conference finals. There really wasn't much going on, it seemed like, that any big stories that really had any legs. Is this one of the more quieter, moratorium periods that you've seen in the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. Things could happen, especially in Chicago, because they have a new coach coming in, Fred Hoiberg, and it wouldn't shock me one bit if they moved or tried to move Noah, for instance, and possibly someone else. It wouldn't surprise me one bit if they shook things up. Same thing with Toronto. I think Toronto's in a position where they might want to trade somebody, and certainly Sacramento. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But, this is going to be the summer of free agency, and I think, to be honest with you, that's where most teams are focusing their attention, after the draft.
Yeah, obviously one free agent we have to talk about is someone you are very familiar with, and that's Chris Middleton. I've actually even suggested that he could possibly get a max contract, largely because of he's a very good player, and of course that the salary is going up next year, so a max contract's far different this year than it will be 3 to 4 years from now. Could he really be someone who gets a max contract?
I would be a little surprised, Larry. You don't rule anything out. I fell out of my chair when Chandler Parsons got his max last year. I guess I'm from the school that nobody gets a max contract unless they're a franchise player that's capable of, almost taking you to the playoffs by himself. And I think he's a very good player, but certainly nothing remotely close to being a max player. And, one of the things, Larry, that people are kind of amused by is that everybody is under the assumption that Chris Middleton took this quantum leap this year. And while he has definitely gotten better, if you look at his stats across the board, minutes per game, field goal percentage, three-point percentage, points per game, rebounds per game, they're almost identical to what they were a year ago. And I talked to a player personnel director for a Western Conference team who was very high in Chris Middleton, and he was shocked. He, for whatever reason, he had never, ever compared the stats. He could be that kind of guy. There's a lot of good things about Chris Middleton, but again, I'd be a little surprised if he did get the max.
I actually mentioned that a little earlier on some past shows. I think like you said, he didn't have the quantum leap. He's improved incrementally every season he's come into the league, but when he was discussed ad nauseum at the Sloan Sports Conference here in Boston here a few weeks ago, I think that is what really raised his stock and made people say, oh my goodness, wow, yeah, this Chris Middleton, great young player, improving in the league every single year. I think it was that, and when you have sort of those people behind you, that only just sort of adds the stock to what you have.
Oh, absolutely. I was talking to one of his teammates, after the trade, and they told me that Chris was really disappointed that the Bucks got rid of Brandon Knight, because Brandon Knight was kind of like would set him up, quite a bit, and where Chris could just basically camp on the perimeter, and Brandon would penetrate and dish it out and stuff like that. And for a while there with Michael Carter-Williams, that wasn't the case, and we'll see. Chris Middleton, I don't want to, beat a dead horse here, is a good player, but he's not that type of guy that's going to take over games. He doesn't have those capabilities. But to think that, 3 years ago he was a second-round pick, and to see where he is now, you really, really have to applaud him.
Yeah, he was a second-round pick and a throw-in and a sign-and-trade, I believe. I believe he came over from Detroit with Brandon Knight. Am I correct?
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Nobody was talking about Chris Middleton. It was all about the Brandons and, what would happen with them. And I'll say this. Larry Drew gave him a chance, and Larry Drew kept him in the lineup and played him. And he made a lot of mistakes, but Larry Drew stuck with him. And then this year, of course, Jason Kidd played him about the same amount. So. But again, that guy has really come, quite a ways just in 3 years.
He really has. He's had a good season. There's some other second-round picks as well. Actually, well, Jimmy Butler, I consider him a second-round draft selection. He was end of the first. But Draymond Green as well. Of a lot of these restricted free agents this year, I believe Greg Monroe was unrestricted, if I am not mistaken. But love this free agency pool. Monroe, Middleton, Green. I guess I'll throw Kawhi Leonard in there, although we all know he's going nowhere. Jimmy Butler. Of that core, the top of the upper echelon, the selection of this crop of free agents here, the summer of 2015, who is most likely to change teams?
Well, Jimmy Butler isn't, unless Derrick Rose goes to management and says he doesn't want to play with him. And I don't know if you know this, but those two aren't exactly, joined at the hip. And it's going to be interesting to see how that plays out going forward. But I have every reason to believe he'll stay in Chicago. I have every reason to believe Middleton will remain with the Bucks. Monroe is going to go to New York or Boston. Who else are we talking about here?
Kawhi Leonard, he'll stay. Marcus Aldridge.
He'll stay. Aldridge, I think, is a little iffy. That could get somewhat interesting, but I fully expect him to stay. I fully expect, and I think the whole world fully expects, Rondo to end up with the Lakers.
He's not an upper echelon free agent anymore.
So I'm trying to think who off the top of my head would else be in the mix.
Yeah, I'm stumped as well. Goran Dragic, he'll probably stay with Miami. But after that, I think you're starting, reach into
you get into a second tier.
Guys.
Yeah.
But you mentioned Jimmy Butler staying with Chicago. I would never underestimate Jerry Reinsdorf. Here's a guy who blew up the Chicago White Sox when they were 3 games out of first place, traded everybody at the trade deadline, blew up a Bulls dynasty. So logic says for Jimmy Butler to stay in Chicago, but you can never really know what that guy is going to do, in my opinion, with his history.
Yeah, absolutely. But if you look at it, what a nice young core. If Rose can stay healthy, I mean, knock on wood. You have Rose, you have Butler, you have McDermott. I'm telling you, Larry, McDermott is going to be a very good player. He just had a tough situation this year where he was playing behind Mike Dunleavy and also Butler, who would swing over to the small forward spot. And then they got Mirotic, who I think is going to be a really good player.
He had a good season.
He did. And, I was talking to Frank Kaminsky at the pre-draft camp in Chicago, and I asked him, I said, what players do you kind of watch in the NBA? And he brought up Mirotic, which I thought was really interesting. Of all the big guys in the NBA, that he was very impressed with Mirotic as well. But, you got those 4 guys going for you. So, they have the core of being a good team for a long time. But, and then, Gasol. Gasol's going to be around a couple more years, and he certainly played at a high level this year. So, and then Chicago being Chicago, can always go out and get a free agent. So, I think they're pretty well set, and I think they realize that. The only guy I would really expect them to move, if they can, is Noah, but he's got some really bad knees, and I think teams are very wary of taking him on.
Yeah, I think they're in an interesting spot, Chicago, because it seems like that group has been given enough chances, and they've had good seasons, but at the same time, they've never really been on the cusp of really doing anything substantial. I think they had 1 year when Rose had the MVP season. They got to the conference finals, but it wasn't that much. It wasn't a very competitive series. They've never really been like, a few plays away from a championship. They've always been second round and out at best. So they have good players, but they have to do, I think, that's one team I think that has to do something bold to mix things up, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think they have to go out and get a free agent, a high-quality free agent. You just don't know with Derrick Rose. He played well in the playoffs for the most part, but if you talk to the players, who see him up close, they know he's not the same Derrick Rose. He doesn't have that elevation anymore. There was a time when he would explode to the basket and then rise above people, and that certainly isn't the case anymore.
Oh, that was the argument I was using when everyone was sort of talking about, watch out for Chicago this year, they're getting Rose back. I was sort of like, Jesus, I mean, here's a guy who has missed seasons. I mean, this is the whole Anthony Hardaway thing. When he started missing multiple seasons, it's one thing if, I mean, you break a leg, you're out for the year, you come back the next year, and you give a guy a benefit of the doubt. When they start getting multiple injuries and they start missing full seasons and you're only playing, like, I don't know what he's played outside of this past season, what was it, like 30 games in, like, the past 3 years? I don't even think it was that. You start to lose it, in my opinion, but I want to shift gears because you mentioned Greg Monroe about going into the Boston, New York. You also had a report, once again, for our audience, journaltimes.com. You stated the same thing, Monroe, either New York or Boston. I've mentioned Greg Monroe a lot on the show because Danny Ainge, you talked about agents having good relationships with certain management. Danny Ainge and David Falk, they have a good relationship, so I would like to think that could add up there. I mean,
you're absolutely right, Larry. I mean, that's the reason I'm hearing, their rapport.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not going to lie. I mean, I like Greg Monroe, but it's the time I only watch him 3 to 5 times a season, and I want to say if that. Could you give me sort of a brief scouting report on him? It seems to be an old school player, good forward with a back-to-basket game, defense is iffy, solid rebounder. Is he someone who could work in the 2010s, 2020s version of the NBA?
Yeah, I do. I like Greg Monroe. I think he's a very good player. I think playing with Smart would be good. Certainly having a good point guard would help him. And the other thing is, they had Drummond, on Detroit this past couple seasons. And Drummond and Monroe were kind of like in the same mold,
it just wasn't a fit. And we were talking about 2010s NBA. It's just that work in 75.
Yeah, exactly. But if I think there's only one of those guys on the floor, and you have somebody that can be, just as mobile and agile and versatile, playing next to him, I think he'd be terrific. Now, is he a franchise player? Absolutely not. But for a team like Boston or New York, certainly that would be an upgrade.
Yeah, and that's what I was sort of thinking in terms of people might say, well, geez, you don't want to offer Greg Monroe a max contract because he's not a franchise player. But I look at it as he would be an asset, and maybe 2-3 years from now, when I think he's 24 right now, he'd be, say, 27, hypothetically. He's a guy who you could trade for along with other draft picks for a franchise player, because that was the issue Boston had last year with Kevin Love. They were just offering all draft choices to Minnesota, and they were like, thanks, but no thanks. Bring Greg Monroe here. He has, a decent season or two. Hey, maybe he does develop into a franchise player, but maybe he's someone who you could package for a franchise player 2 to 3 years down the line if he has good seasons.
Yeah. I mean, he's a young player, and he's a talented player, and he's the big, most importantly. And if you can find a very talented big, you're definitely going to go after him. So, again, the nice thing about that situation is Boston doesn't have to give up anything except money, and they can keep their core players intact. So it's going to be very interesting to see where he ends up.
Is he someone, though, who could be acquired in a sign-and-trade? Because I think that's sort of possible. I think you'll see some sign-and-trades to allow some of these players to make more money, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that, too. I mean, if I was the Celtics, I wouldn't do it, I would just want the guy flat out, coming to my team. But, yeah, I agree with you. I think there's going to be a couple of those kind of situations, coming up.
Yeah, and I would actually almost think that the Celtics could possibly do it, because if you add Greg Monroe, then you already have Sullinger and Olynyk. So it wouldn't hurt them if they did move, say, Sullinger or Olynyk, and maybe even a pick along the way for Monroe. But last question, most fun question. Had you here for a while, Gary.
All right.
Bold prediction of the offseason. I'm giving you the floor.
The bold prediction. Okay. I'll say this is going way, 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 way out there, okay?
All right. Here we go. It's bold.
You want bold. I mean, anybody can predict the average stuff,
give me a bold and then a realistic one. How's that?
I am going to say that David Blatt gets fired.
Oh, wow. That is bold.
That's way, way, way out there.
Then they bring in Ty Lue. That would make sense. Maybe that'd be a way.
Yeah, I just don't, for as good a job as he did, and certainly I would be the last person to say, hey, get rid of him, I just don't see the rapport between him and LeBron.
I don't either. I agree with you.
And to me, it's like if LeBron doesn't want David Blatt, he's out of there. I mean, let's face it, it's LeBron's show.
Yeah.
And if he decides that he can't coexist with David Blatt going forward, it wouldn't shock me one bit.
Yeah, he got Mike Brown fired the first go-around, and that was when he was a free agent, for goodness sake. I mean, that tells you something right there. What about Kevin Love, though? That's my real last question. Is he? I know there's been a lot of rumors about him going there. I just think it'd be tough to walk from a team that was 2 wins away from the championship. I mean, maybe he comes back on a shorter deal and says, man, I'll give this one more try and make it work. But I just don't see him leaving Cleveland. I see that the most realistic scenario. Am I right there?
Yeah, you know what? I tend to agree with you that he's going to stay. But at the same time, I saw Kevin Love late in the regular season, and he didn't seem to be like a happy guy. And maybe that's changed, since I last talked to him. But to me, Kevin Love has always been this happy guy, just real outgoing, personable. And he became more withdrawn. And I understand that he's playing with LeBron. He's got to take a back seat. And I just wonder if he wants to stay there for the fact of winning a title or move on, where he can be that, dominant player that he was in Minnesota, the go-to guy. And it's going to be very interesting to see. And conversely, I want to see how badly Cleveland wants him back, because Tristan Thompson, showed in the playoffs that he's pretty darn good. He's not Kevin Love, but he's not going to cost as much as Kevin Love either. So I think that's really going to be a fun story to follow this summer.
Yeah, if there was going to be a sign and trade, you think that could be a possibility, because they wouldn't let him walk for nothing, in my opinion. I mean,
absolutely, and you know what? I think they should. They should try to find a shooting guard. Somebody that can stretch the floor for LeBron. I mean, J.R. Smith, let's say.
He was not going to cut it, I don't think.
No, I mean, the only reason J.R. Smith is on that team is because of LeBron. I mean, that's the sole reason. And after what he did in the playoffs, you got to wonder if LeBron wants him on his team. So, but if I'm them, I would definitely dangle Kevin Love and try to get a top-notch shooting guard.
Gery Woelfel, JournalTimes.com. You can follow Gery on Twitter at Gery Woelfel. That was awesome. Thanks so much for joining us on Celtics Beat.
Well, I appreciate it. That was a lot of fun.